I want you to picture a boy, maybe 7 years old, maybe 8. He's standing outside a bakery. Not inside. Outside, his face is pressed against the glass. His breath is fogging up the window. Then he's staring at the bread inside. Not because he thinks it's beautiful, not because he's curious about how it's made, but because he hasn't eaten in 2 days. And that bread, that simple loaf of bread that you and I would walk past without a second thought, that bread to that little boy is the most magnificent thing he has ever seen in his life. I want you to keep that image in your mind, because that boy grew up, that boy failed. That boy was rejected. That boy slept on floors. That boy was laughed at. That boy was told by people who were supposed to love him that he would never be anything. That boy carried shame like it was stitched into his skin. That boy looked at the world, and for a long time, the world looked right back at him and said, "You don't belong here." And yet that boy built something. Not overnight, not without bleeding, not without breaking, but he built something real, something that mattered, something that changed not just his life, but the lives of everyone around him. And today, I want to talk to you about that journey. Not because it's comfortable, not because it's clean, but because somewhere in this room, somewhere watching this right now, there is someone who is still pressing their face against the glass. Someone who is still on the outside looking in. Someone who has been told they don't belong at the table. And I need you to hear this with every single cell in your body. Your poverty is not your destiny. Your starting point is not your ending point. And the fact that you began with nothing, absolutely nothing, does not mean you will end with nothing. In fact, I want to suggest something radical to you today. I want to suggest that beginning with nothing might be the greatest gift the universe ever gave you. Stay with me. Stay with me. Stay with me, because I know some of you just flinched at that. I know some of you are sitting there right now, thinking, easy for you to say. And you're right. It's easy to say. But I've seen it. I've watched it. I've lived it. And I've watched hundreds and thousands of others live it. And when you see the pattern, when you truly see it, you can never unsee it. So let's go back to the beginning. Let's go all the way back. Let me tell you about a man named Marcus. Now, Marcus grew up in a 2-room house in a small town that most maps didn't even bother to include. His father worked at a factory 6 days a week. His mother cleaned other people's homes. And on a good month, they had just enough. On a bad month, and there were many bad months, they had almost nothing. The electricity would get cut off. The water would be cold. The meals would be small and silent, because hunger makes a family quiet in a way that's hard to describe unless you felt it yourself. Marcus went to school in shoes with holes in them. Not small holes, big holes. Holes where the rain came in and soaked his socks, and he would sit in class with wet feet trying to focus on math problems while his toes went numb. He used to stuff newspaper in the bottom of his shoes to keep the cold out. Newspaper? Think about that for a moment. That was his solution. That was his innovation at 8 years old. And here's what nobody tells you about growing up poor. Here's the thing that the motivational posters and the highlight reels never capture. The hardest part of growing up poor isn't the hunger. It isn't the cold. It isn't the holes in your shoes. The hardest part is the shame. The invisible weight of feeling like you are less than. The way other kids look at your lunch. The way teachers sometimes look at you with pity that feels worse than contempt. The way you learn very early to make yourself small so that no one notices what you don't have. Marcus learned to be invisible. He learned to shrink. He learned to sit in the back of the room and never raise his hand, because raising your hand means being seen, and being seen means being judged, and being judged when you already feel broken. That is a risk that feels too enormous to take. But there was one thing Marcus had. One thing that poverty couldn't touch, couldn't steal, couldn't weigh down. And that was his mind. That restless, hungry, relentless mind used to watch everything. He would watch the way the owner of the local shop moved through his... He would watch how the man who repaired cars in the neighborhood talked to his customers. He would watch how money moved, how it flowed, who it went to and why. And slowly, silently, in the back of that cold classroom with wet feet and newspaper soles, Marcus was getting an education that no curriculum ever taught. He was learning how the world actually worked. Now you need to understand something about the minds of people who grow up with nothing. When you grow up with resources, with safety nets, with parents who can catch you when you fall, You have the luxury of being careless. You have the luxury of not paying attention. But when you grow up with nothing, when every mistake costs something you cannot afford to lose, you develop a kind of focus, a kind of sharp-edged awareness that people who grew up comfortable simply don't have. Necessity doesn't just breed invention. Necessity breeds obsession. Necessity breeds a hunger, not just in your stomach, but in your soul, that never fully goes away. And that hunger, that fire, that constant low-level roar in your chest that says, more, more, I need more, I will find more. That is not a burden, that is your superpower. But Marcus didn't know that yet. Marcus was 15 when he got his first job, washing dishes at a restaurant. They paid him almost nothing. He worked 4 nights a week after school, came home at midnight with pruned hands and aching feet, woke up at 6 the next morning, and did it all over again. His mother cried the first night he came home from that job. Not because she was proud, though she was. She cried because she was heartbroken that her son had to do this, that this was the life she had given him. And Marcus saw her crying, and he made a decision, a quiet decision. The kind of decision that doesn't come with fanfare or announcement. He made a decision in his chest, in the deep, quiet part of himself, that he was going to change this, that he didn't know how and he didn't know when, but he was going to change this, and nothing was going to stop him. That decision, that moment of quiet, burning resolve, that is where every business empire in history actually begins. Not in a boardroom, not in a business school, not with $1 million investment. It begins in a moment of private, ferocious, almost desperate determination. It begins when someone looks at their circumstances and says, not with bravado, but bone-deep conviction, "This is not where my story ends," Marcus said. For 2 years, washing dishes and later waiting tables, he saved every cent he could. He didn't spend on things other teenagers spent on. No new clothes, no going out. He lived like an ascetic monk at the age of 16, 17. Because he could see something they couldn't see. He could see the future. Not clearly, not in detail. But he could feel it out there, like a warm light at the end of a very long tunnel. And he was moving toward it with everything he had. At 17, he had $800. $800. But that's nothing, right? In the world of business, in the world of startups and venture capital and angel investors, $800 is not even a conversation. It's not even a footnote. It's a rounding error. But for Marcus, $800 was everything. $800 was 2 years of sacrifice made visible. $800 was the physical proof that his plan was working, that discipline had a return, that the future was not a dream but a destination. He used that $800 to buy a lawnmower and some basic gardening equipment. And he started knocking on doors. Not fancy doors. Not wealthy neighborhood doors. Just doors. Any doors. Offering to cut grass, trim hedges, clear gutters. Doing the work that other people didn't want to do. Doing it better than anyone expected. Showing up on time, every time, with a smile that said, "I am grateful for this opportunity." Even when his body was exhausted and the sun was punishing, but within one summer, he had 12 regular clients. Within 1 year, he had hired 2 other boys from his neighborhood, paid them fairly, and was managing a route of over 30 homes. Within 3 years, he had a landscaping company with a truck, equipment insurance, and a waiting list. Now let me stop here for a moment because I can feel some of you nodding along, thinking this is a straightforward success story, a rags to riches story, a clean arc from poverty to prosperity. And I need to tell you right now, it was not clean. It was not straight. And the version I'm telling you right now is the sanitized version, the version that fits in a speech. The real version had chapters that I haven't told you yet. Chapters that Marcus himself doesn't always like to revisit. Because here's what happened when Marcus was 22, he lost everything. The client sued him. A hedge trimmer kicked up a rock, the rock cracked a window. The client's daughter was standing nearby, startled, fell, fractured her wrist. It was an accident. A genuine, terrible, heartbreaking accident. But Marcus had let his insurance lapse for 3 months because money was tight and he thought he could manage without it for just a little while, just a short period, just until the next big payment came in. We have all done this. We have all told ourselves just this once and just for a little while. And sometimes we get away with it. And sometimes we don't. Marcus didn't. The lawsuit wiped him out. The legal fees alone consumed what he had in the bank. He had to sell the truck. He had to let his employees go. And that, he told me once, was the hardest thing he had ever done. Not losing the money, not losing the business. Sitting across from two young men who had trusted him, who had left other jobs to work for him, who had families of their own to feed, and telling them he was sorry, telling them he had failed them. He went home that night to the same neighborhood he had grown up in. He sat in his childhood bedroom, which his mother had kept exactly as it was, as if she had always known he might need to come back. And he sat there for 3 days. He didn't eat much. He didn't eat much. He didn't sleep much. He just sat there in that small room with the same walls that had watched him grow up dreaming of escape, and now they were watching him come back, defeated. And this is the moment I want to talk about. This exact moment. Because this is the moment that separates the ones who make it from the ones who don't. Not the moment of first success. Not the moment when things are going well. This moment right here. The dark room. The silence. The weight of failure pressing down on you like a physical thing. There are two voices in that room. The first voice is the voice you already know. The voice that has been there your whole life. The voice of every person who ever doubted you. Every circumstance that ever crushed you. Every moment of shame and rejection and inadequacy that has accumulated inside you since childhood. That voice speaks loudly in that dark room. It says, see, I told you. You tried to escape where you came from, and look what happened. You don't belong up there, you never did. Come back down, stay down, it's safer down here. And then there's the second voice, but the second voice is quieter, much quieter. But it's there, it's always there. And what it says is this, you've been here before. Not exactly here, but in rooms like this, in feelings like this, and you got up. You always got up. And you learned something. Every single time, you learned something. On the fourth day, Marcus got up dramatically, not with a battle cry or a speech. He just got up, made himself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and started writing. He wrote down everything he had learned, everything the lawsuit had taught him, every mistake he had made in the business. Every moment where he had cut a corner or ignored a warning sign or told himself it would be fine when something inside him knew it wouldn't be. He filled 6 pages of paper and then he wrote at the top, what I know now. And he started again, this time differently. This time with scar tissue. This time with the hard-won knowledge of someone who has paid for their education, not in tuition, but in tears. He knew that insurance was not optional. He knew that growth had to be sustainable. He knew that the systems behind a business mattered as much as the hustle in front of it. He knew in his bones, in a way you can only know from failure, that taking shortcuts was not boldness. It was delayed disaster. He started smaller this time, much smaller. Just him, one mower, a handful of clients. But he built it differently. He built it differently. He built it with foundations this time, not just walls. He took a small business course at a community center 3 evenings a week. He read books, not business school books, real books, books by people who had built things from nothing, who had failed and rebuilt and failed again. He found a mentor, a retired contractor named Edie, who had built and sold 3 businesses in his lifetime and who agreed to meet Marcus for coffee every 2 weeks and tell him what he saw. Ed told Marcus something in one of those early meetings that Marcus never forgot. He said, son, most people think business is about making money. It's not. Business is about solving problems. If you find a real problem that real people have and you solve it better than anyone else, the money follows. Always, without exception. Stop chasing money and start chasing problems. Marcus turned that over in his mind for weeks. Chasing problems, he thought about his neighborhood. He thought about the streets he had grown up on. And he started to see them differently. Not as a place of limitation, but as a place of needs, unmet needs. Real problems that real people had that nobody was solving well. He saw that the elderly residents in his area had no reliable, affordable help with home maintenance. Not big repairs, those went to contractors, but the small things, the leaky faucet, the broken fence panel, the gutter that needed clearing, the light bulb in a high socket that a 70-year-old woman couldn't safely reach herself. Small things that accumulated into large anxieties for people who lived alone and couldn't afford a contractor for every little job and couldn't ask a family member because family was far away or busy or simply not there. Marcus started a handyman service, just him. Just a toolkit and a van. A second-hand van with 200,000 miles on it and a simple business card. Marcus, home help. I fix the small things. I fix the small things. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to hear that. Because that sentence, that simple, humble, beautifully specific sentence, is one of the most sophisticated business strategies I have ever encountered. It was specific, it was clear, it spoke directly to a pain point. It didn't try to be everything, it didn't try to compete with big contractors. It found a gap, a specific human need that was going unmet, and it planted its flag in that gap. Within 6 months. Marcus was booked 2 weeks ahead. Why? Not because he was the cheapest, not because he had the fanciest equipment, because he was reliable, because he showed up when he said he would, because he charged what he quoted, because he treated his clients, many of them elderly, many of them isolated, many of them lonely, like human beings. He learned their names. He remembered that Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter was coming to visit and he would ask about it next time. He remembered that Mr. Chen had bad knees and he would move furniture himself rather than asking the man to help. He brought a kind of dignity to his work that the work itself was begging for. And here is something I want you to burn into your memory right now, because this is one of the most powerful business principles in the world, and it costs nothing to understand and everything to practice. People do not pay for products. People do not pay for products. People do not pay for services. People pay for how you make them feel. Read that again. People pay for how you make them feel. The elderly woman who books Marcus every month doesn't just need her faucet fixed. She can get a faucet fixed. She books Marcus because when Marcus comes, she feels safe. She feels cared for. She feels like someone in this enormous, busy, indifferent world has taken a moment to see her. And that feeling, that irreplaceable, deeply human feeling of being seen and valued, that is worth more than any price you can put on a service. Marcus understood this, not because he learned it in a course. He understood it because he had grown up feeling invisible. He understood it because he knew in his bones what it meant to be overlooked, to be dismissed, to be treated as less than. And he made a decision, not a business strategy, a moral decision, that he would never make anyone feel that way. Not ever. That decision, that moral compass disguised as a customer service philosophy, became the core of his brand. It became the thing that his clients talked about when they recommended him to their neighbors. Not, he fixed the sink, but he was so kind. He was so respectful. He made me feel like my home mattered, like I mattered. You cannot buy that reputation. You cannot fake it. You can only earn it. One person at a time, one moment of genuine kindness at a time, that business grew. Slowly at first, then faster. He hired a part-time assistant, then a full-time one, then a second technician. He created systems. He was obsessed with systems this time around. Because systems are what had been missing before, systems are what had let him down. He documented everything. Every process, every checklist, every client preference recorded and saved. He built a small database on a 5-year-old laptop. Nothing sophisticated, just organized, just careful, just thoughtful. When he was 26, he had a team of 8 people. When he was 28, he had expanded to 2 neighboring cities. When he was 30, he had 17 employees, a proper office, and a business that generated over $1 million a year in revenue. Let me say that again. A boy who grew up stuffing newspaper into his shoes to keep out the rain built a company generating over $1 million a year in revenue. But here's what I really want to tell you about Marcus at 30. Here's the thing that matters more than the revenue number. Marcus at 30 was the same person as Marcus at 8, pressing his face against the bakery window. Except now Marcus owned the bakery. And the first thing he did when he had resources was go back to his neighborhood. Not to show off, not to be admired, to hire, to invest, to give someone else the same chance he had fought so hard for himself. His first 2 hires were young men who had grown up in the same streets he had. One of them had been in trouble with the law. One of them had dropped out of school. Neither of them had references or clean records or the kind of resume that makes HR departments comfortable. And Marcus hired them both. He trained them personally. He invested time and patience in them the way Aid had invested time and patience in him. He understood that the investment in a human being, the real investment, the patient, sustained belief in you investment, always pays the highest dividend. Both of those men are still with the company today. One of them is now the operations manager. The other runs an entire regional division. Nope. And when you ask either of them what changed their lives, they don't say getting a job. They say, someone believed in me. Someone believed in me. 4 words. 4 words that cost nothing and change everything. Now I want to step back from Marcus's story for a moment because I think we need to talk about something that the success stories always skip over. We need to talk about the psychology of poverty. Because there is a dimension to growing up poor that shapes you in ways that go far deeper than the material circumstances. And if we don't talk about it, if we don't address it, then all the strategy and discipline and mentorship in the world will only take you so far. When you grow up with nothing, you internalize a story about yourself. A story that says, I am not enough. I don't deserve more. Good things happen to other people, not to me. And this story, this narrative, it doesn't just sit quietly in the background. It is active. It is alive. It shapes every decision you make. It makes you afraid to ask for too much. It makes you sabotage yourself right before the breakthrough. It makes you work harder than anyone else and then inexplicably give away your power right at the moment when your power is at its peak. Psychologists have a term for this. They call it the upper limit problem. The idea that each of us has an unconscious ceiling, a level of success, of happiness, of abundance, above which we feel we don't deserve to go. And when we approach that ceiling, we self-destruct. We pick a fight. We make a bad decision. We let the insurance lapse. Marcus did this. And the extraordinary thing about Marcus is that he knew he was doing it, and he still almost couldn't stop himself. He told me once that after his first business failed, he spent 2 years in therapy alongside building the second one. 2 years, sitting in a small office, talking to a woman who helped him excavate all the stories he had told himself about who he was and what he deserved. And he said it was the hardest work he ever did. Harder than building the business. Harder than the 18-hour days and the lawsuits and the failures. Harder than any of it, because you can learn business strategy in a book. You cannot learn how to love yourself from a book. That knowledge, the knowledge of your own worth, the conviction that you deserve to succeed, the ability to hold abundance without panicking and destroying it. That knowledge can only be found through honest, courageous, deeply uncomfortable inner work. And I say this not to add yet another thing to your list of things you need to do. I say this because I watched too many brilliant, hard-working, talented people from difficult backgrounds get so close to their dreams, and then right at the moment when it should all come together, blow it up. And they don't understand why. They think it's bad luck. They think it's circumstance. They think someone is against them. And sometimes those things are true, but not always. Not usually. Usually the ceiling is inside. And you have to do the work to raise it. Now let's talk about something else. Let's talk about the people who will try to keep you down. And I don't mean the obvious villains. I don't mean the people who openly disrespect you or dismiss you. Oh, these people are easy to deal with because you can see them. I mean the subtle ones, the ones who love you, the ones who are afraid for you, the ones who, from a place of genuine care and genuine fear, will look at what you're building and say, but what if it doesn't work? What if you fail? What if you lose everything? Why can't you just be happy with what you have? These are the hardest voices to navigate because they come wrapped in love. Because the people speaking them are not your enemies. They are your family, your friends, the people who were there when you had nothing and who are terrified of watching you fall again. And their fear is real. Their love is real. But their vision of your future is not yours to accept. Here is something I want you to write down if you're taking notes. If you're not taking notes, I want you to engrave it somewhere in your body where you won't forget it. Your vision of your life is not subject to a vote. Say that again with me in your head. My vision of my life is not subject to a vote. The people who love you do not get to vote on your future. The people who raised you do not get to vote on your future. The people who have known you since you were small and poor and struggling, people who genuinely, truly, dearly love you, they do not get to vote on who you become. Because here is the thing about the people who have known you in your lowest moments. Sometimes unconsciously they need you to stay at your lowest. Not because they are malicious, but because your rise means change. Your rise means the old dynamic shifts. So to old dynamic shift. Your rise means you will become someone they don't fully recognize. And that is terrifying for people who care about you because they are afraid of losing you to your success. Marcus faced this. Marcus had relatives who called him foolish, who said he was getting above himself, who said people like us don't do things like that. And he had to make one of the most painful choices that any ambitious person from a difficult background has to make. He had to love them and still not listen to them. He had to honor where he came from without being imprisoned by it. Being imprisoned by it. That is not betrayal. That is not arrogance. That is not forgetting your roots. That is choosing life. That is choosing growth. That is choosing the full expression of every gift you are given, rather than hiding those gifts to make other people more comfortable with your presence. You are allowed to grow, even when it makes others uncomfortable, even when it changes things, even when it means that some relationships will have to be renegotiated or some people will have to be loved from a gentler distance. You are allowed to grow. Let me tell you about another person. Her name was Amara. She grew up in a family of 6 in a small apartment. Her mother was a seamstress. Her father had left when Amara was 3. She didn't grow up talking about poverty, because in her community, poverty was just life. It wasn't a label, it was the water everyone swam in. And nobody named it because naming it made it more real than it already was. Amara was brilliant at school, truly brilliant. The kind of student who made teachers feel like they were witnessing something rare. She tested into a top high school across the city, a school that her mother had to take 2 buses to get her to on time each morning. And every day on that journey, her mother would say the same thing. She would say, you are not just riding these buses for you are riding them for all of us, for every person in our family who never got this chance. Don't waste it, no pressure. Right? Amara didn't waste it. She got a scholarship to university. She studied finance because she had grown up watching money or the absence of it run the lives of everyone she loved. And she had decided early that she was going to understand it, master it, make it work for her rather than against her. She graduated at the top of her class. She got a job at a financial firm. She wore suits that she had saved for 6 months to buy. She sat in meetings with people who had grown up in houses where her entire apartment building could have fit in the living room, and she was excellent. She was so good at her job it was almost unsettling. Because she had something her colleagues didn't have. She had the perspective of someone who had grown up on the other side of the financial decisions being made in those rooms. She understood viscerally, concretely, personally, what it meant when an interest rate changed, what it meant when a lending policy tightened, what it meant when credit became inaccessible. She didn't understand it as an abstraction. She understood it as the difference between having dinner and not having dinner. That perspective, that embodied lived understanding, was worth more than any MBA. But here's what happened to Amara. She spent 8 years at that firm, 8 years being excellent, 8 years being better than most of the people who got promoted over her, 8 years watching men who were less capable, less knowledgeable, less dedicated, climb past her because they had the right school ties, the right golf club memberships, the right last names. 8 years being told in 100 subtle ways that she was welcome to do the work, but that the recognition would go elsewhere. And on a Tuesday in February, after 8 years, Amara walked out of that firm and never went back.